Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Joseph Houseal, the director of Core of Culture, and I am here with my friend Scott Park Phillips, martial artist, dancer, somatic historian, and martial arts anthropologist and author of two books, Possible Origins and Tai Chi, Baguazhang, and the Golden Elixir. Like many others, I read his books and was fascinated with his grappling to bridge the chasm between the contemporary experience that many of us have of martial arts and the gap or the connections between past evidence of what they might have been. This is a creative but empty place to try to begin to decipher and find and discover research. And he's found a lot. And with this research comes a new contextualizing, a new language, a new way of talking about some of the issues of movement transmissions over time. This is our third discussion today, interview with Scott, that was intended to be a 3-question interview about 5 weeks ago. And the questions stretched out. So today we're going to pick up with question 3, matters of beauty and matters of ritual collective body. So we can begin there. And I want to say, Scott, thank you very much and welcome today.
Thank you. All right. Well, so what you want, is that the question or are you going to?
No, I'll give you a question here. The question would be this. It's in reference to a statement you made that I thought was really provocative and fascinating and wondered if you could say more. You said, martial arts are about adding beauty to the world. And that statement was made in a discussion about martial arts forms being created to fight effectively. And a lot of your work is like, well, they seem a lot like theater. They seem a lot like mime. They seem a lot like ritual. They have these other aspects about them. But the question of beauty doesn't come up much any more than like a beautiful equation being efficient, and purposeful. And I'm wondering if you could say something about this idea of martial arts as adding beauty to the world, and perhaps a little bit about the difference between actual martial arts and theatrical martial arts like kabuki or ballet, where they're not really fighting effectively, but they are moving in a martial manner, you might say. So that's a loaded question, but the question of beauty in the martial arts.
Yeah, Joseph, that's loaded. There's a lot there. Let me just start saying something about beauty, and we'll just keep spiraling back around to it. The only real reason for any education at all is the possibility of bringing you into proximity of beauty. There is no other case for education that I am aware of. Everything derives from that it is of value to us as humans to be in the proximity of beauty. And that is why it's worth trying to learn things. And so if someone is starting from a different premise, I would just roll them back to that.
But don't you think they would say, no, if you get an education to get a good job, you get an education to learn how to think. I'm trying to think of parents and why they educate their children. So I think if they heard beauty, it's a little out in left field, to say, well, beauty is the reason for education. I wonder, is that because, do you believe beauty teaches?
So no, it's not that beauty teaches, that education has the capacity to enable you to see beauty or recognize beauty. Look, actually, Elaine Scarry's take. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's sort of a literary, philosophical person. She wrote a book called On Beauty and Being Just. And she says, there's 2 mistakes people make about beauty. There's 2 fundamental mistakes people make about beauty. The first one is, I don't remember which one is first. It doesn't matter. The first one is not seeing beauty in something and then later recognizing that it's beautiful and feeling the tragedy of having missed that beauty for all the time before you recognized it. And the second mistake you can make about beauty is seeing something as beautiful and then later seeing it as false and not beautiful and feeling betrayed. Okay. And those are the two mistakes we make about beauty. And that it is because everyone has made these mistakes that we actually believe in justice. That is where our notion of justice comes from. The fact that we ourselves could right now be making a mistake about justice, or anyone else could, they could do, you could do wrong in the world. We could judge someone, right, for having done wrong in the world because they made a mistake, a fundamental mistake about the nature of beauty. So I kind of, this seems like, oh, am I talking about martial arts? Yeah, I am. I am talking about martial arts and art in general. The the conceit of the modern martial arts school, as it were, is that there is a thing called pure martial arts. So there is martial arts that is just about the techniques of fighting, or you even get over into the idea that there are, practicing scenarios, real life scenarios. They have to be real. It can't be fighting elves or zombies or something. It has to be real, right? And so, the sort of conceit of the modern martial arts school is that it's utterly utilitarian. But look, well, first of all, I would refer people to Rory Miller's wonderful book, Meditations on Violence, which is, after his experience of being in the jails and training people, and he trained people to prison guards in Iraq. He has all these. He has a huge number of experiences with violence, right? And they're all in a particular type of context, but with criminals, right? And so he lays out like how delusional martial artists are, is really what the book is sort of about. And like what would looking at the actual subject be like? And if you were to look at the actual subject, what would a martial art look like? If you were going to take the time to create one, what would it look like? Right. And so, I read this and I wrote a review where I said something like, this is a great book. It makes martial artists feel like we're a bunch of girls in pajamas at a pajama party. And, he comes in with his gear and we're like, whoa, tell us more,
But
And
in fact, I think what's interesting with that idea too is that you're talking about, and you mentioned this in an earlier talk, there's a real difference between actual violence, when there really is criminal violent behavior, how they behave, and the studied behavior of the martial arts, which create these scenarios and styles and things that are quite different from actual situations of real world violence. And in fact, wouldn't the Boxer Rebellion be the ultimate image of that? That this is where they got mowed down by powerful guns, in terms of violence and in terms of handling violence when it gets to this level. Is there any correlation there between that interface between modern violence, gun violence, and the martial arts?
Well, that's a tough side question, because they also had guns on their side, and they weren't just one thing. And so it's like that war, the Boxer Uprising, also was really the beginning of a 40-year long war. If you really think about it, it's not. I really wouldn't pin it down to those particular instances of violence where people were believed they were invulnerable to bullets. I think that framing really limits our capacity to understand what happened. But here I'll just keep going. First of all, I developed an incredible relationship with Rory Miller. Just, we met and he's like, and I made all these sort of provocative statements when in his workshop, which was like, okay, you want to talk about beauty. Okay, so we we met in a dangerous ghetto neighborhood in Oakland. There was actually like a motorcycle clubhouse, right? That had like a boxing ring in the back outdoors, right? And gravel everywhere and oil slicks and weird metal sculptures and like motorcycle parts everywhere and like bullets on, and broken glass. I mean, it was an incredible environment, right? Um, and with a bar, and then there was a Bud Light um, uh, machine, like put in the dollar and get out a Bud Light
Vending
machine,
machine.
a
Yeah.
vending machine. And anyway, and he taught his first, like one of his first, it was one of his first civilian, what is self-defense, right? And he's been instrumental in defining what self-defense is. It's really a new subject. And it's a legal subject, and then it's a subject that is the study of criminal behavior, or the context in which, not just criminal behavior, the context in which you might need to defend yourself in the real world. And in any event, he was like, he stopped. He's like, oh, by the way, this is the guy who thinks most martial arts are just theater. Like he kept stopping, and we had like an enlightenment moment. Like when we were talking, we were just like, wait, you're enlightened too? Oh, that's cool. Like, so we've been friends for a long time. He's someone who cares enormously about beauty, because the main purpose, right, for a civilized person, for a good person, is the protection of what's beautiful. So you're either guarding beauty, you're creating beauty, or you're recognizing it, you're making it available. And beauty has this incredible effect on people. It spreads, it has effects on people, which then spread to other people. It is, in fact, in a sense, the purpose of ritual, or ritual in a sense replicates spontaneous beauty, you might say.
And I think that a lot of the beauty of the things, the lasting value. The beauty has a lasting, a lingering, a spreading value, as you say, and a lasting value.
Yeah. And as you and I are dancers, right? And so there's this thing about we are the most ephemeral art there is. I mean, the sand paintings try to compete with us, but we're really the most ephemeral art. And yet, that makes our bodies holy in some sense, because we can manifest this beauty. Right. And so, I came to the martial arts with this, maybe not so well developed, but certainly a sense of this.
Do you think that your growing understanding of violence and the nature of violence, and these things you've read about the nature of violence, have increased your appreciation for your understanding of beauty?
Undeniably. And well, actually, hey, I just picked this up. It's really well written. It's Iron Ambition. It's Mike Tyson's time with Cus D'Amato. And it's 2017. It's really well written. Great characters. But I don't know if you've ever seen Joyce Carol Oates' book on boxing.
No.
It's a beautiful, she's a famous literary person, writes literature, and she had her relationship with her father, she describes as being constructed around watching boxing. And so she developed as a child a deep appreciation for the beauty of boxing. And she's not a
Is she
boxer
a
herself.
dancer and a choreographer?
Hmm?
Is she a dancer and
No,
choreographer?
Joyce Carol Oates is a literature. She writes
Because there is
literature.
a Black woman dancer whose father was a boxer.
Oh, I
And
bet.
she
Yeah,
grew
they're
up
probably
in
true.
it, and she does performances in a boxing ring. Really incredible, really incredible stuff. It's so self-referential, and what happens in a boxing ring and what they're for, and the identity politics that go on in a boxing ring. So very interesting to hear this from a literary perspective.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, she mentions Mike Tyson too as this, like, this. She talks about his beauty, right? And so it's a really interesting little book, and I think my experience was similar to hers, because I was raised by hippies, and I was trying to be a pacifist as a teenager, you know, and I something broke, something fell apart, I started to see beauty in this other realm, in this extraordinary masculine realm. And here's another one. This guy I met him through a woman who is an incredible duelist. She fights with swords. She's also an artist. And she suggested I go meet this guy, Ed Calderon, who has now become fairly famous because he's been on Joe Rogan twice. And I went to meet Ed Calderon, and he's doing a martial arts class, basically, about his experience, things he learned from criminals as a doing drug and kidnapping interdiction on the Mexican border. And he sort of starts at the feet and works his way up to the head, and he's sort of going through techniques, right, and this stuff. And I got to play with him, what we call crossing hands, rough play. And he was delicate like a butterfly. And I already, my internal martial arts already taught me to do this. But here's a guy from, really the other side of the tracks, the other side of the border, who has this quality, right? And we were doing earlier in class, we were doing leg breaking techniques, leg disabling techniques, and I've learned there was nothing new there for me, right? I knew all these techniques. There was nothing new there. But he was teaching at one point later in the day, and I was like, "Wait, you've actually broken people's legs, haven't you?" And he's like, next question, I was like, no, wait. I mean, I'm really asking you, like, like, how many people's legs have you broken? And he's like, well, look, in Mexico, when we clear a room, we break their legs. That's what we do. That's just the culture. And I was breaking down doors, about 4 days a week for 10 years. So I'm like, quick math calculation. Okay, I don't even want to think about that. So I'm like, oh, and so what happens is your body, when you do that, your body becomes so precise and beautiful, like the movement of a butterfly. Like, what? I'm gonna just keep going on this strain. I don't know if you've ever seen Mexican hat dance. There are some gorgeous Mexican hat dances and practitioners of that tradition. And of course, this was a dueling art that it's the same dance used for teaching dueling with a hat that is also for courting. And if you've seen these guys, they are so light on their feet. They're masters of lightness and grace, And so to me, what we have in the West, and what the source of that question, the question about, is, aren't martial arts just about fighting, right? Something like that, right? The source of that.
The question is not that broad. The question is that the forms were created to be effective fighting forms. That was the question. That how were they connected, and maybe what's the difference between a theatrical version of where they're not created to be effective.
Yeah, but I want to. I straw manned you. No, good question. But I straw manned you a little bit because that is the question I get a lot. And so the answer to that, which will lead to the answer to the other question, is that if you don't have a fear of dance, if you come from a culture that doesn't fear dance at some level, where dance is not an affront to masculinity, for instance, if you're in a culture that has a space for dance, where dance itself is valorized, you're not going to separate dance from martial skills. You might in particular context, but they're actually going to be one. And I think we see that all over the world, where male dancers are valorized, they are martial arts. And so then if we're asking the question specifically about what makes things effective, right? That that usually has to do with a kind of what kind of transmission. So if you learn Italian folk dance, for instance, most of Italian folk dances are fighting dances. Um, but if you want to actually be able to fight with them, you need to have a grandfather who gives you a stiletto and says, "Okay, now let's learn how to use this thing," right? And so there's a very familial transmission there. But it
When
might.
we were in Bhutan, we experienced this. Um, we're having some very old, 500-year-old. They called them martial training dances, and so we were
Mhm.
out in a village, and they were 6 different villages. The men came together, and they did these long dances. One where they never let go of each other's hands for the entire dance, and another one, and it was very interesting. And they all had swords, and their swords were sort of dull, and we were sort of fascinated with like, well, what technique do you use? And they didn't understand the question. And like, well, how did you learn it? And like, finally, someone came up to us like, we learned it from our fathers. We learned it from our fathers. And the other thing was, because this was more of a medieval approach to fighting, which meant there was a pyrrhic frenzy in an attack. So there wasn't any technique. It was, you build yourself up to a madness, and chop someone's head off.
Mhm.
That's the martial art. But
Mhm.
the dances were really there to rehearse sword strokes, trust exercises, formation exercises. So all these dances trained them. One dance in particular, it was just all, when you went with their sword in their hand, you could see the whole thing with sword strokes, a horde in the hand, a pike in the other hand. So it was very interesting that you could see where there's an absence of an army, that the dances could be used rather quickly and efficiently to train people in basics of fighting techniques before but people that from different areas that group together to form a militia. So it was a fascinating little bit of history to see those dances done, and how they served the militia building purpose. So sort of, I understand what you're saying in that.
Yeah, and well, I'll go back to Rory Miller because I think it's kind of useful, like just as a foil. He's like, okay, if I was going to create a martial art from the ground up, first of all, I would deal with the all the things that happen before a fight. Like, where do fights happen? Why do they happen? How do you avoid them? And what's the legal situation you're putting yourself in? And all the things that could happen before. Like, that's kind of key. You really doesn't make sense to teach something physical until you have the context right. Um, but then,
Especially if the duty is to avoid the fight, especially so, yeah.
yeah, but also if you've never killed someone and now you're in a situation where, in order to protect the beauty of your village, you have to kill someone, you're going to have to change your identity. It's like you talk about the trance traditions that teach people to like become a deity in order to now fight, right? Or to convince yourself that the deities are what's giving you your power or something like that. These are to help these identity transitions. These are very traditional ways of doing this, to get you there. If you've already done it, the transition is so hard. If this is your fifth or sixth battle, getting in the mindset of fighting is not so hard. But if you're not just going to go like they say charge and you go spears are pointed at me and you freeze, right? So you want rituals that will get people to actually charge and to
Very
actually
interesting.
fight.
I have a good friend who's one of the best martial artists I know, live and disciple of a sword master in Japan. But he was attacked in Africa decades ago. In the middle of the desert, their jeep was attacked and 7 people were killed. And I think he probably killed somebody. He keeps it to himself. But that's when he decided to go study a martial art, and that's when he decided to do it very, very seriously. And the seriousness is always, you don't want me to fight. You don't want me to fight. I will do everything. And it's very interesting how he went into it, why he went into it, and like you say, always the first thing that he says, look at the entire context and avoid the fight. That's very good advice.
Yeah.
So I understand some of what you're saying.
Well, so another thing Rory Miller says, which is that for most people who live in a civilized world, that we are actually born predators. We actually have the biology to fight ferociously. That's, and he gives all sorts of examples about how this is true, and we could go into that. But we have that biology. We can, at the drop of a hat, fight ferociously and really intelligently. It's just that social conventions stop us from being able to see that option when the moment arises. So what he says is that the biggest thing, actually, besides breaking the freeze, is slipping the leash, because society has a leash on us that we keep there, and that's what keeps everybody safe from each other. But so it's this slipping of the leash that you need to figure out a way to teach. Another thing, because I'm trying to get at the idea of, like, do forms have techniques in them, right? And how much of what a form is, a theatrical form, is a series of techniques, and so he has like four things. It's just like, this is a lesson. I'm going to teach you to be a much better fighter in half a day or a day, right?
Money well spent.
Here's the four things you want, right? You want to target vulnerable areas, okay, of the body. Here they are. Practice touching them. Practice. If you're gonna attack eyes, you need to practice putting your fingers in people's eyes, okay? Like that, you got to do that, because if you haven't done that in the moment, you're not going to do it probably. So you need to practice, so whatever, throw all the vulnerable areas. So know what they are, practice touching them. Okay. Vulnerable areas. Mess up people's balance, mess up their balance, do practices, and dance. Partner dances are fantastic way to learn how to do this. Okay. If you know how to do a waltz, if you know how to, do what I call the rough waltz or the drunken waltz, you know how to move somebody. It doesn't matter their size. And then there's mess up someone's structure, right? So all the good Western dance traditions teach structure up front. They're like,
what do you mean by structure in this case?
Well, the sometimes called frame, and it's also called, it's the basis for port de bras in ballet.
Would you say how you hold the body?
How you hold the body so that it's resilient against external forces, so that it holds together, right? So, and that's what you're messing up. So mess up their structure.
Balance and then structure.
So, and then improve your position. And if you're a dancer, you know how to get in a better position, and you're practicing that in a context in which, in dance, you're doing it just to learn movement in space. In martial arts, you have a particular intent. And the problem with most martial arts schools is they frame it in terms of a challenge. And this is not universal, and it's not a universal problem, but I see it pretty often, that the idea of the fight is this person versus this one, and that is very hard in that context to improve your position. It's not impossible, it's possible, and that is still the problem they're solving. But if you've worked with dance a lot and you don't see it as a challenge, you see it as a game, improving your position is actually a lot easier. So those are the four. Any martial arts movement has to do all four of those. Otherwise, it really doesn't work very well.
Well, I've heard it said too that the arts are intended to express, and the arts are intended to be seen. And so I've heard it often, well, this is what distinguishes them from the martial arts. The fundamental purpose of the martial arts is not to express, and the fundamental purpose of the martial arts, it has a different reason to exist, you might say, than the effective purpose. So I've heard this understood, and that the purpose of the martial arts is not to be seen. It's not to show off the form, whereas in the arts, it's to be seen. What do you think about those ideas of being seen, or being an art by being the intention is to express? I was just talking to my dancer friend from Japan, I was telling you about, and she was referring to contemporary dance.
Yeah.
Okay, now she's a little older than me. So by contemporary dance, she means postmodern abstract dancing that doesn't have any expression and doesn't have any. And she was saying it's really so similar to No and it's Gestalt, that but so even our own Western theatrical dance tradition has these various expressive or non-expressive. But I wonder what you think about the question of expression in martial arts, or the intention is to be seen, to have the entire arc of the movement form be on display as an expressive statement. What do you think about those ideas?
I mean, it's an interesting conversation, but I don't think it's a very strong argument. For instance, if you're dealing with, so I've in the context of learning, real fighting skills, I've watched a lot of videos of muggers, various types of muggers who are looking for resources, right? And it's almost universal thing that they do. They're gonna, somebody's gonna attack an old lady, right, and steal her stuff, right? What do? They look left, they look right. And if they see a witness, they wait. And they look right, no witness, go. Right? And they always use overwhelming force. They're always looking at someone who appears to be a vulnerable.
Unsuspecting.
Yeah, it's horrible. But that's the thing, is it's like this type of violence, that type of violence, that particular type of violence wants zero audience, right? They want no audience. But
that's not martial arts, really, would you say?
Well, but they might use a technique, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Is
they have techniques.
If we pivot this question around techniques, we're creating this problem. But look, what about another kind of violence that is also very common, which what I call the educational beatdown. So you've walked into our bar, or you are a member of our group, and you've misbehaved. You did something, you broke some rule that we had set as a rule. Don't talk to my girl, right? Whatever the rule is, whatever. I mean, maybe it's just you're not welcome here, whatever it is.
Maybe we just invented it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's social violence. That has an audience. That has an audience. And you'll even see, even when it's done as an ambush on the street, you'll see the cut marks with the knives are done in the long, so you can see a really long cut, because it's for an audience even after the fact.
But I feel like we're talking more about violence than martial arts in this question, or do you feel those kind of blur together?
I'm trying to take the hard case and erase the assumption that that display is not important. I'm just trying, that assumption I think is false, but I think it's still an interesting question because there are certain contexts in which it is important. But if I'm talking about myself as a martial artist, I'm expressive, extremely expressive, and I teach an expressive art. And I do think that the more traditional arts everywhere are actually about bringing yourself up to a higher virtue of some kind, a deity, a higher virtue from which to fight from. Right.
So you would see them really, that you would see martial arts as a perfectly correct term, and art, me having more of an Asian ennobling, transformative aspect to it.
Absolutely. You don't want to fight as yourself. The reason you don't want to fight as yourself is because you're a nice person. You don't, if you're, and that's why I'm saying when people say, they're like, that's the idea. The martial arts school, Like if we're training, we're training to fight. No, that's kind of a mistake. You want to train to be able to express a fighter's a
But
fighter.
I think I want to make a distinction between your ideas and sort of what is prevalent in the martial arts. I mean, I
Yeah,
hear you
please,
about beauty, you
please.
make a nice case for beauty, but I don't think most men practicing the martial arts would say beauty was the reason they do them. So I wonder.
Oh, they don't like the word
I
beauty. They
wonder.
like.
I wonder where you think. This is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about your ideas, because I
Yeah.
think they're important, but I do think they're some of them stand alone in the wilderness, and they need to find this connection to people who really practice these, are involved in these arts as you are, and that's why I ask these questions. Like, I understand the conviction, but I don't see that as a widespread notion, and wonder how do you make that understanding more widespread? By your teaching? Is that the way you would respond, by your
Oh,
teaching and your writing?
yeah.
I mean, I took this notion out of your book, but you don't write about it yet, um, the subject yet, but it's a fascinating subject. So I wonder how you think about, or if you care about, spreading this idea, because it is an idea that actually I think is conducive to better understanding some of the theories in your book. If you understand these ideas you have about beauty, which are very interesting in relation to violence, in relation to fighting, in relation to history and understanding art and martial arts traditions, understanding this greater notion of beauty that you have in violence sort of shares the space, with, excuse me, get rid of that. Okay. There we go. No, I think it helps people understand that, and gives them a bit of a way, another way into some of the writing.
Yeah. So, Joseph, you really hit on a couple of important points here, which is that idea is the idea I'm suggesting here, that martial arts is beautiful, is transgressive. It
Today,
cuts across a major thing in our culture where, where guys are like, no, we're going to learn to fight. And I'm going, oh, you mean in order to be beautiful? No, we're not doing to be beautiful. Oh, you mean in order to protect what's beautiful? Well, really, we just want to fight. But, yeah, if we have to, like, are you so disconnected from your actual motivations that you can't admit that you think fighting is beautiful? Is that the problem here? Is that why I'm not getting through?
well, that's very. I don't know, that's an interesting question to put, because most of you've got martial arts buddies. I got my martial arts, but they geeks. Martial arts guys are as geeky on martial arts as anybody is geeky on anything. They really are absolutely besotted with the martial art. But I think that this question is nevertheless very interesting, and I want to add this question too. That again, you sort of straddle two worlds, or three worlds, or four worlds, but in fact, I was in my 30s before it struck me, because a couple of my friends, that there are natural fighters just like there are natural dancers. I was born a dancer. I know how to dance. And then I learned some techniques. Now I know several different techniques. When I do martial arts, as I was joking with you, I look like a dancer no matter how hard I try. I never, it's like you're not going to kill anybody with that kabuki. But the thing that's interesting is I do think I'm speaking of guys because I mostly work with guys.
Yeah.
They're really born natural fighters, and they like fight. They enjoy it a lot. They enjoy the combat. They enjoy it. They're really good at it. They're natural at it. And so then they enjoy, like a dancer does. You learn this technique, you learn that technique. I'll go to the Caribbean and learn that technique. I learned this Indian technique. You want to learn these techniques, but none of them teach you how to dance. You kind of already know how to dance. They give you a vocabulary to dance, but they don't. It's sort of like, I remember when I was teaching ballet back long years ago, people would say, well, can you make my daughter musical? I'm like, well, if she is, I can bring it out. But if she's not, I can't make her musical. So I wonder what you think about sort of some people are better fighter, that whole class of Tibetan monk, the Dubois, part of the reason they were established, because if you got 30,000 men or 10,000 men or 6,000 men or 1,000 men in a compound, there are going to be those that are going to be aggressive and want to fight. And so they created this other class, so they didn't have to follow the liturgical rules, didn't have to dress it. They had these other things that they did. But I wonder too, I think that bringing in these larger ideas of self-improvement and beauty, which are inherent, I believe, in the study of these martial arts, but I think people might come to them because they have a capacity for it, a knack. You know, always you were describing breaking the legs, finding it's sort of like you got the knack, you know, the knack. I'm learning this Newar, dancing in Nepal. Oh, I've got everything but the knack. I don't have the knack yet at all. You know, I'm gonna get it, but I don't have the knack yet. So I wonder what you think about this people that seem to have a natural capacity for fighting and enjoy it. And we're trying to learn some ways to do it, and how their minds might be, you know, sort of more drawn into these other thinking.
That's more questions than you might think it is. That's a lot of questions. I kind of want to go the Taoist direction here, and talk about Taoism a little bit, and to answer that. And I think that what a human being is in the sort of Taoist definition of a human being is a series of appetites. We have particular types of appetites, and you know, and I think this is not really a difference between Buddhism and Taoism, but it is a kind of it may be a way in which Taoism defined itself in reaction to a kind of Buddhist proselytizing rather than an actual difference between the traditions. But Taoists are like, you know, hearing all this about how the problem of desire, right, it causes this cycle of illusion, and Taoists are like, well, yeah, but what a human is, if you don't go all the way out those desire paths, but you actually are in touch with what your appetites are and explore them, you actually have a kind of path to seeing things as they are. That there's this very simple way to have a kind of, you know, what Buddhists were calling enlightenment, but Taoists are calling becoming immortal. It's a slightly different idea, that you get there by actually exploring your unique appetites and nourishing them and fostering them in creative and spontaneous ways to discover the world, right? To dance in the world with the elements, to dance with the cosmos.
Would you suggest then that maybe just, I think this anyway, I'm always surprised at people that study acupuncture and never study Chinese philosophy, or they study Chinese martial arts and they never Chinese art, or they, you know, it all seems to go together. So you think maybe to try to broker ideas or discussion of beauty really among martial artists, reference to something like Taoism is a way for them to feel connected and to feel expanded at the same time?
Yeah, I think that the ideas that create, we could get, this would be a good way to connect to Buddhism, by the way, but the ideas that fostered what we know today as martial arts are deeply rooted in a Taoist vision of the world. And I only touch on this in my book because, you know, it's such a big project to identify and show that to people, that you know, I kind of, it's like, hey, this thing was in the past, you know, and we're going to pull some threads out of it so I can explain this picture. But there's this bigger picture.
No, very, very much. I really agree with you. This is a really interesting point. And that is really, what do you do with contemporary practice and past evidence? You know, whether the past evidence is a gap or whether the past evidence is you find a connection with it. What is the importance and the relevance, even as your work goes back to find new past evidence and refer? So as you're saying, you know, this Taoist connection, oh, if it only wasn't 5,000 years long, it would be easier to study, you know? And I hear what you're saying. But What would you say?
Oh, we lost our connection. Say that again. We lost our connection for a minute. Like, just
Oh, I'm
repeat
so
the last
sorry.
question.
No,
Yeah.
I was just asking. No, about what, bringing in notions of Taoism, which is, because it's so old, the question of, past evidence. What do we do with past evidence as a contemporary practitioner of some, I was asking you regarding the collective body, you were trained by Chinese teacher. I was trained by Chinese teacher and Japanese teachers and British teachers. I was trained by Chinese teachers. So we both have some connection to Chinese traditions, and yet I feel, even the way I was taught, sometimes it was the behavior of the Chinese teacher was that example of Taoism you saw, was in the behavior of this doctor who did acupuncture, who had an herbal shop and taught martial arts, and the whole united front, a little different than how they market it more. But I agree with you. Do you think that this connection with past evidence, how do you understand that? What's a modern martial artist who goes into study martial arts? How are they to make that connection personally, to find merit in it, maybe to get closer to some of your ideas of beauty and the depth of personhood that you're talking about?
Well, I think we'll talk about this point. We're all over the place here. Actually, something I wanted to say, and then I'll go pivot back to Lao Tzu. That I'm gonna do an interview with some Mongolians in a couple weeks, and I've already heard from one of them that talking about Mongolian wrestling, like there's just a saying, if you can't really do the eagle dance well, you can't wrestle. It's like they actually think of the secrets, in a sense, of their wrestling capacity as being in the eagle dance, right? And it's like it's a wrestler's dance, right? And you do it before and after you wrestle, right? And it's like they're like.
But these examples that you're giving, I guess what I'm talking about, why I wanted to interview you, was so that your ideas would have a broader audience, that your ideas would reach other people, because I think they're really interesting ideas that crack things open for consideration. And so I'm convinced, I was sort of convinced before I talked to you. I see these relationships and these wonderful comments you're making about the integration of these in other societies that were never separated, that never separated the martial arts from ritual, from dancing. It was all, there were even separate words sometimes, the name of the ritual meant all of it. So I really understand it. I guess I'm wondering how these ideas would reach a greater group of practitioners, because I'm wondering, are you trying to transform the practice of martial arts with your work? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes.
And how that can be done. Where's the way to go with that?
Well, it's tough. I'd like to say I'm flowing down a river, but the river has a lot of waterfalls,
Flowing up the river, yeah.
I keep crashing on the rocks. But yes, certainly it is my agenda and it's a very simple agenda, is to get people to see beauty in the martial arts, in a bigger vision of what the martial arts are, to see it in its full glory, so that the pieces aren't lost, right?
That's a very good way of explaining the general merits of both of your books. You paint a bigger picture. You use past evidence to paint a bigger picture than what we've kind of, I don't know, inherited. I hate to say inherited, but what we've kind of got now has become its own thing. And so I see you, I agree with you. You're painting a larger picture.
So let me pivot to Lao Tzu for a second. I actually have a chapter here that's really like, each couplet is about how things separate, and how do you stop them from separating, but they can't really separate because they're actually part of the same thing. So I mean, I have to explain the whole thing, but it's like containing yin po. It's like the part of your body that's always going up and the part that's always going down. Like, can you hold on to it? That's the first line, right? The second line is, gathering chi and becoming limber. Can you be like an infant?
Can you be like a baby? Yeah. Can you?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know this message. It's
You know,
very
so
wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah.
gazing through the dark mirror, right? Which maybe is just a bowl of water or something. It's like not clear exactly what it is. Or can is it immaculate? Is it unblemished? Um, Loving people and ruling the state, right? This sort of like pull these two extremes of like human behavior. Can you practice wu wei? Can you practice not doing? Can you be unpretentious? Um, uh, Opening and closing the gates of heaven. Can you remain feminine? Can you
They like the woman. Correct. Yeah.
yeah, this image. It's an image of nurturing, which comes back, and then reaching out in clarity in the four directions. Can you stay with not knowing? Seeing with incredible clarity. Can you also stay with not knowing? And these lines, right, describe a, a, the kind of parameters of human appetites. And then it says, give birth and nurture, give birth without possessing, empower without controlling. This is called Schwenda, or mysterious efficacy, or dark virtue, something like that, right? And Tao Te Ching is like this all the way through. With this chapter, for instance, it has this kind of, whoa, are you pulling apart? Wait, you're pulling back together, and it's you can think of it as the way in which human beings engage with appetites. And it's like I'm talking about Mongolian wrestling. If you don't have an appetite for the eagle dance, you're not going to be a good wrestler, right? It's the way in which the art pulls itself back together, right, as it pulls itself apart, and has an aesthetic component and has a practical component. It has it has an expressive component. It has a self-nurturing component. um it allows you to see beauty where you didn't see it before. It allows you to defend beauty from things which are not beautiful.
I like that idea, because I'm trying to think ideas that are, give entry points. And this idea that, most definitely learning a martial art from the very beginner Tai Chi, you're learning to see beauty that you didn't see before. You're learning to see it as an entirely new framework for perception. And I think part of what you're saying too is that it would behoove martial artists to try to explore the full range of perceptive, requirements or opportunity that comes with the practice and the training of learning a martial art. And that would give some opportunity too for some of these ideas that you're saying, because ultimately everything you're saying very much relates to your own actual practice. And so you could give this whole hour's interview just by moving, probably,
Yeah,
and demonstrate exactly what you're talking about.
or yeah, so like when I teach children, right? I have all sorts of ways of which doing the same thing. Like there's like like I'll play with how wild I let the kids get by using the drums, right?
Okay.
By using the drums and the gongs, so that I'll do things so that even though they're kind of wild, it looks like they're keeping beat with my drum, and I've already given them cues to freeze or whatever, and then take shape and take theatrical shape and expression, like that as an artist, as a teaching artist, I'm working with this space and sound environment to create something that brings something out of students, but also teaches them to contain it, right?
Well, it's very interesting. I had a Montessori teacher friend,
Mm.
and she had this exercise where she said, I'm going to everybody down on the ground, and I'm going to beat this drum, and I want you to be the seed of a flower. And I want the seed to germinate and to grow open, and they get leaves, and then they have a beautiful flower. And so she started beating her drum, and the kids started, and these two boys on the side were just lying on the floor, thrashing around, contracting and thrashing around. She just kept beating one of them. Like, what are you doing? Turned out both of their parents were scientists, and they'd seen videos of germinating seeds. And so they were on the floor imitating the videos of germinating seeds.
That's so awesome.
As they were writing. It's so awesome, and it sort of like reminds me of your lesson. Letting them, find that path, find their own path.
But it's also about seeing, right? So, like for instance, I'll teach kids some basic stage combat. I'm teaching them forms and teaching them about their bodies. I'm teaching them about holding shape. I'm teaching them about explosive energy. But then I'll teach them about, how you create the illusion of fighting, right? And then I'll help them. I'll get them to improvise a narrative, right? So then we're actually in the moral realm. So we're actually like, so why would you do this? Why would you tell this story? Right. Like, and so we get to explore that, but also like when you learn a little bit of stage combat and suddenly you have this superpower to be able to make it look like you're fighting when you're not, which is a really fun thing to tease teachers with in school, I have to say. And it's another part of that is suddenly, for instance, I've had, friends, often girlfriends who are like, oh, I can't watch those violent movies. I'm like, but it's dance. They're not getting hurt, right? It's theatrical dance. They're like, no, I can't watch it. I'm like, but if you've learned some stage combat, you see the art, right? You see the art, you go, oh, that was an amazing, that really made that look good.
But that is very much how to watch Peking opera more than how to watch Die Hard, because the intention of the movie is to look awful and be brutal. I think what you're describing is really more about some of the insights I saw you bringing about opera in China, which I've had the opportunity to see a good bit of. And the penny dropped when I read your book, like, oh my gosh, this is really, the connection was so obvious and so clear, and so direct, really, with the theatricality of the ruse. I saw a one in honor. It was the 20th anniversary of the handover of Hong Kong, and the government sponsored this huge Cantonese opera festival with all these big Cantonese opera stars. And one was Guanyin, the emperor's daughter who becomes Guanyin. That was the story.
Right.
And she's like, forget about it. I'm running away. So the general's chasing her to get her. She doesn't want to get married, so she goes to a convent. And please accept me into the convent. And they're like, oh, we know who you are. You're trouble. Forget it. The last thing we need is trouble. You can join, but you've got to do a few tasks. And one of the tasks was to take a steel pole and to whittle it down to a needle so she could sew something.
Right.
Okay. And in the next scene, they took the 80-year-old woman who did it in the 60s just to play that one scene. Okay. And the one scene was she picks the bar up and it's so heavy, it bends her in half backwards. And then bent in half backwards, she looks at the audience and sings an aria in that position. And so it's exactly as you're saying, there's a marvel even in the ruse of getting to that point. I would love to see your ideas more widely understood and spread. We've gone an hour already. I imagine this question of beauty, and I think some of the girlfriends you've talked about, I think they have quite a fair point about images of violence. I was just talking on a conference on The Other, and I said, I met a man from India and he was going back to India. And I said, well, what did you miss most about India? And he said, oh, the movies. And I said, well, why? And he said, because Americans think that murder is entertainment. That's all you have is murder, child abuse, rape of women. That's a steady diet of American entertainment. I like singing and dancing and pretty things and big numbers. I want to go to the movies to see something happy. I don't want to see murder and rape and child abuse. And so it was a very interesting point, what we've done to beautify violence, in a way, and glamorize it. I want to thank you so much for indulging my questions and, pushing the buttons of beauty. And I hope we will have at least another one about Buddhism so that I can help frame some thoughts about Buddhism and you and your work, maybe for the readership of Buddhist Store Global.
Oh yeah, let's just do that. Let's just talk next time about, and I'll prep just for talking about Buddhism, because I'm ready to go. I have a lot to say, and
it might have to be in two parts.
Hey, if you like that video, don't forget to subscribe and watch the other ones. Also, check out my book, Tai Chi, Baguazhang, and the Golden Elixir, Internal Martial Arts Before the Boxer Uprising. And you can also find me at northstarmartialarts.com. Thanks.